The most exclusive high society wedding of the year unfolded in full splendor. Red velvet carpets stretched endlessly across the manicured lawns, luxury vehicles lined the private driveway, and famous socialites and wealthy elites flooded the venue, filling the air with warm applause and celebratory cheers. Everyone present was offering sincere wishes to the stunning bride Liana, congratulating her on marrying into a prestigious, wealthy family and stepping into a glamorous upper-class life overnight. No one knew the bone-chilling secret hidden beneath this glittering, picture-perfect wedding. Mounted in the most prominent position at the main entrance of the wedding venue was a custom-made official notice board, printed with a clear frontal photograph of me in bold, uncompromising text. The announcement explicitly prohibited me from entering the wedding grounds under any circumstances, and the person labeled a disgraceful intruder forbidden to approach was none other than Harry Carter, the man who had raised Liana single-handedly for 30 years, who had sacrificed his entire youth and life to build her every bit of glory. Guests streamed past one after another, blinded by the extravagant celebration before them. None of them understood the absurd, tragic core of this glamorous wedding. Every ounce of elegance, every bit of social status, every privileged resource Liana possessed on her wedding day originated from my decades of blood, sweat, and relentless toil. I held the sole legal ownership of her six-figure trust fund and luxury mansion down payment, the only financial foundation supporting her lavish wedding, the only asset capable of covering her massive personal debts, and the sole pillar propping up her so-called wealthy wife identity. Yet on the brightest, most glorious day of her life, my own daughter spared no expense to post this humiliating notice 3 full days in advance. She blocked my phone number, erased all traces of my existence from her life, and publicly expelled me like a shameful criminal. Countless passers-by and guests cast sideways glances of curiosity, pity, and mockery, turning the loving father who had given her everything into the biggest joke of her perfect wedding. No soul could fathom the icy despair freezing my heart in that moment, nor could they foresee the inevitable collapse awaiting Liana's glamorous fairy tale. The second she chose to trample on her own blood and kin for superficial dignity, her carefully crafted upper-class life was doomed to crumble into complete ruin. 30 years ago, my wife lay dying from terminal illness, her frail fingers clutching mine tightly as she breathed out her final wish. "Take care of our little girl. Don't let her suffer a single hardship." I kept that sacred vow faithfully for 3 decades. I never remarried, cut off all personal desires and pleasures, and endured every storm and hardship alone. While other men my age retired peacefully and enjoyed their twilight years, I continued grinding out heavy labor on construction sites well into my 60s. While others spent their earnings on leisure and comfort, I lived frugally in faded work uniforms, scrimping on every penny to pour the finest resources and highest quality life possible into Liana's upbringing. Old coworkers and townsfolk had warned me countless times that excessive indulgence would nurture an ungrateful white-eyed wolf. I had always refused to believe it. I clung stubbornly to the naive faith that blood was thicker than water, that lifelong devotion would eventually be rewarded with gratitude. It was not until this humiliating wedding day that I finally saw the terrifying truth hidden beneath my daughter's polished, elegant exterior, vanity so deep it drowned her conscience, and selfishness so cold it severed familial bonds without a shred of hesitation. I spent decades accumulating a substantial 6-figure trust fund and sinking my life savings into a down payment for a high-end Riverview mansion in the city's core district, laying a solid financial foundation for Liana's entire future. To protect these hard-won assets from being squandered or manipulated by unscrupulous people, I hired a top-tier legal team to complete full legal notarization and asset registration. An unbreakable legal rule was established. No fund withdrawal, property transfer, or asset modification could take place without my in-person signature and legal confirmation. No third party, regardless of relationship or status, had the authority to touch a single cent of my life savings. I never intended to control or restrain my daughter. My only wish was to hold these assets in trust until she matured fully and settled into a stable marriage, then hand everything over unconditionally, granting her a lifetime of financial freedom and stable prosperity. I had believed this selfless protection would serve as her safest lifeline. I could never have imagined that my lifelong devotion and unreserved backing would instead become the very confidence that emboldened her to humiliate me without remorse. Everything changed after Liana left our small town and immersed herself in the city's upper-class social circles. She began deliberately hiding her humble small-town origins and erasing all traces of my existence from her polished social persona. The arduous, blue-collar life I had endured to give her a better future became the shameful secret she desperately sought to bury to fit in with her wealthy peers. Brett Wilson's appearance completed her moral corruption. On the surface, he was a gentle, refined, wealthy heir with impeccable manners and generous spending habits, perfectly crafted to sweep ambitious young women off their feet. Beneath the facade, he was calculating, manipulative, and ruthlessly status-driven. He easily detected Liana's inferiority complex and desperate craving for social validation, and he quickly identified my greatest weakness, my boundless paternal love and unconditional willingness to sacrifice everything for my daughter. Brett wove a subtle, insidious scheme long before the wedding. He stoked Liana's vanity day after day, convincing her that my working-class identity was an indelible stain on her elegant reputation and the biggest obstacle blocking her path to true upper-class status. The two colluded silently, each chasing their own selfish gains, meticulously planning the cruel blow that would sever our father-daughter bond entirely on her wedding day. Liana had always been utterly certain of one thing. My 30 years of unconditional love had left me completely soft-hearted and lenient. She was convinced that no matter how coldly she treated me, how disrespectfully she spoke to me, or how ruthlessly she abandoned me, I would always forgive her, compromise for her, and clean up every mess she made. She believed I would never dare ruin her marriage or destroy the perfect life I had spent my whole life building for her. Armed with this arrogant certainty, she dared to take every cruel step without hesitation. She sacrificed her blood ties and trampled on decades of nurturing grace merely in exchange for fleeting social praise, empty vanity, and a false upper-class identity she craved more than her own family. In her eyes, she had won everything that day: a dream wedding admired by all, a prestigious social status, and a clean break from her impoverished past. She was blissfully unaware that she had thrown away her only lifeline. Her clever, calculated scheme was nothing but a foolish farce that would condemn her entire future to ruin. Wedding music blared endlessly across the decorated venue, flower petals drifted through the warm breeze, and cheers and blessings surrounded Liana as she stood at the center of the grand stage in her custom designer wedding gown, glowing like a perfect angel. Meanwhile, I was nailed to the margins of her glory, reduced to the forbidden, shameful secret no one was allowed to mention. I became the sole source of embarrassment at the wedding that owed every bit of its splendor to my life's blood and sweat. The wind brushed across the harsh, printed notice fluttering at the gate, sweeping away the last trace of warmth in my heart and extinguishing every bit of lingering affection I had held for 30 years. The soft, sensible little girl who once clung to my side, who promised to take care of me in my old age, was gone forever. In her place stood a cold, selfish young woman consumed by vanity who saw her own father as nothing more than a disposable burden. I stood silently before the false prosperity unfolding before me, feeling every ounce of my paternal devotion harden into ice within my chest. I finally understood the cruel truth. Boundless indulgence never breeds gratitude, it only breeds greed. 4 years, I had tolerated her indifference, excused her estrangement, and forgiven her disrespect, clinging to the fragile hope that blood ties would eventually bring her back to her senses. But it was Liana herself who had severed every thread of our bond. It was she who chose empty social prestige over the father who had given her everything. From the moment she posted that humiliating notice and blocked every way to reach me, all my love and leniency had vanished completely. Every safety net I had woven for her over 30 years was officially withdrawn. She thought she had cast off a shameful burden to secure a lifetime of wealth and status. She had no idea that every bit of glory she wore that day, every asset supporting her dream life, every opportunity she had ever seized, rested entirely in my hands. She had pushed away not a burden, but her only salvation. She had discarded not a stain on her reputation, but her entire promising future. A bone-deep cold settled over my entire body, quiet and irreversible. I suppressed the surging grief and bitterness in my chest and made my final, unshakable decision in my heart. If she insisted on being ruthless and ungrateful, I would personally end all her illusions of luck and privilege. The retribution she had earned was already waiting for her, inevitable and inescapable. I had driven 3 full hours that morning, filled with nothing but sincere joy and fatherly blessing. I had worn the finest brand-new suit I had ever owned, carefully preserved for her wedding day. I had carried my late wife's most precious bridal jewelry, a treasure I had cherished for 30 years, intending to hand it to my daughter as a lifelong wedding gift. I had arrived with a heart full of hope and love, only to be met with public humiliation and crushing coldness. The wedding I had anticipated for years, the day I had dreamed of watching my daughter start her new life, had turned into the most absurd, humiliating, and heartbreaking ending to 30 years of fatherly love. 2 years into her relationship with Brett, Liana finally told me they had set a wedding date. The moment I heard the news, all the exhaustion and grievance accumulated from decades of backbreaking labor melted away instantly. My heart swelled with pure, gentle joy and eager anticipation. My little girl, the child I had raised alone through every hardship, had finally grown up. She was about to build her own family and embark on a bright new chapter of life. I spared no effort to prepare for her wedding, determined to offer the most sincere and dignified blessing I could possibly give. I traveled to the town's only high-end formalwear boutique and spent a substantial sum on a custom-tailored dark suit, the most expensive and finest set of clothing I had ever purchased in my entire life. I never dared wear it casually after bringing it home. I hung it carefully in my closet, dusted it daily, and smoothed out every wrinkle meticulously, saving its perfect condition exclusively for my daughter's wedding day. I wanted nothing more than to stand tall and dignified as I walked my little girl down the aisle. Beyond the suit, I retrieved the most precious keepsake I owned, my late wife's bridal jewelry set, preserved carefully for 30 years. The collection included a string of natural pearl necklaces and a pair of hand-engraved vintage silver bracelets, imbued with decades of warm memories and irreplaceable sentimental value. These were the most precious, pure treasures in my simple life, the last physical reminder of my wife's love and kindness. I drove to a professional high-end jewelry maintenance shop in the city, paying a premium fee to have every piece polished, refurbished, and restored to its original luster. All oxidation, and wear was meticulously removed until the pearls glowed softly and the silver shimmered like new. I placed the entire set gently into a velvet gift box, planning to present it personally to Liana as her wedding dowry, carrying forward the love and blessing of both her departed mother and myself. The wedding venue was booked at a top-tier private luxury manor on the city's outskirts, a prestigious high-society location favored by local wealthy families. Nestled between rolling green hills and clear waters, the estate boasted exquisite landscaping, elegant European-style architecture, and exclusive private facilities. The drive from my small town to the manor spanned nearly 3 hours of winding highway. I woke at dawn on the wedding day, long before the sun fully rose. The early morning light filtered softly through the windows of my quiet old courtyard, casting gentle rays across the simple wooden furniture. I sat quietly on the edge of my bed for a long while, my mind wandering through 30 years of memories. I watched the mental images unfold one by one. Liana taking her first wobbly steps as a toddler, her childish laughter echoing through the small house, her sitting beside me doing homework after my late-night shifts, growing taller and more graceful with each passing year. From a helpless little girl who had lost her mother at 3 to a beautiful bride standing on the verge of marriage, 30 years of hardship and devotion flashed before my eyes in an instant, leaving me filled with tender fatherly reluctance and quiet pride. I reminded myself repeatedly that today was my daughter's happiest day, and all I needed to do was stand quietly in the background, witness her joy, and offer my sincere blessing. I washed carefully, shaved away my scattered gray stubble, and combed my thinning mottled hair neatly. I slipped on the brand-new custom suit button by button, adjusting my collar and smoothing every crease in front of the mirror repeatedly. The reflection staring back at me was an elderly man covered in deep wrinkles of time, his hair streaked heavily with gray, his frame slightly hunched from decades of heavy labor. Yet the formal suit lent him a rare, solemn dignity. I stared at my reflection firmly, whispering a silent reminder to myself, Stay steady, stay dignified. Do not cause trouble. Do not embarrass my daughter on her wedding day. No matter how humble my status, my blessing for her was pure and sincere. I placed the velvet jewelry box gently on the passenger seat of my old pickup truck, then carefully inspected the tires, brakes, and fuel tank to ensure every part of the vehicle was in perfect condition for the drive. After confirming everything was safe, I started the engine slowly and set off on the 3-hour journey to my daughter's wedding. This aging pickup truck had accompanied me through half my life's trials and triumphs. For years, it had carried me back and forth between countless construction sites, bearing the weight of my tools and my relentless struggle to survive. It had transported a young Liana to and from school every day, carrying her school bags, her childish dreams, and our small family's simple hopes. Its interior was worn and plain, its engine noisy on long drives, its exterior faded and ordinary compared to luxury vehicles. Yet it was the most genuine witness to every bit of my hard work and every step of my perseverance. As the roadside scenery drifted slowly backward, my heart grew softer and warmer with every passing mile. I constantly pictured the warm, grand scenes awaiting me at the wedding venue, my daughter standing gracefully in her white wedding gown, her eyes bright with happiness, myself walking beside her, placing her hand gently in Brett's, whispering my best wishes for her lifelong peace and joy. I had no desire for recognition from the wealthy guests, no craving for a seat at the main table, no need for admiration or respect from strangers. All I wanted was to silently witness the happiest moment of my daughter's life and hand over my lifelong blessings and most precious treasures with my own hands. By midday, the sun shone bright and warm, the soft summer breeze brushing gently against my windows. I arrived punctually at the gates of the luxury wedding manor. The scene unfolding before my eyes was far more extravagant and stunning than I had imagined. The entire estate was decorated with imported fresh flowers, pure white gauze curtains, and delicate green plant arrangements. Ornate fountains trickled softly in the courtyard, exquisite floral installations lined the red carpet, and warm, decorative lamps dotted the entire venue, creating an atmosphere of supreme elegance and affluence. Luxury cars lined the long driveway: Bentleys, Mercedes-Benzes, BMWs, Porsches, each one gleaming under the sunlight. Every guest entering the venue was dressed in designer clothing, with refined makeup and poised, elegant manners, exuding the inherent confidence of high society elites. Sitting in my old pickup truck, gazing at the bustling, glamorous scene before me, I felt nothing but genuine happiness for Liana. She had finally broken free from the poverty and limitations of our small-town life, stepped out of the humble hardships of my working-class world, and embraced the brilliant, enviable life she had always desired. For a brief moment, I believed that my decades of toil and sacrifice had all been worthwhile. I took a deep breath, smoothed the hem of my brand-new suit tightly in my hands, gripped the velvet jewelry box firmly, and pushed open the car door. I walked slowly and steadily toward the manor's iron gate, my heart full of pious anticipation and sincere fatherly blessing. The moment I stepped forward to cross the threshold, 2 tall security guards in crisp black uniforms strode forward instantly, blocking my path firmly on both sides. Their expressions were rigid and unyielding, their voices cold and businesslike, leaving no room for negotiation or explanation. I froze for a split second, assuming they were simply enforcing standard guest registration procedures. I softened my tone immediately, speaking politely and respectfully. "Excuse me, officers. I'm Liana Carter's father. I've come to attend my daughter's wedding." I spoke with sincere humility, fully expecting my identity as the bride's father would grant me immediate entry. But no trace of leniency or understanding appeared on the guards' faces, only obvious awkwardness and helpless sympathy. One guard raised his hand and pointed directly at the most prominent position in the center of the gate, gesturing for me to look for myself. I followed his gaze upward, and in that single instant, every drop of blood in my body turned ice cold. My limbs went rigid, my scalp burned numb with shock, and every trace of warmth and anticipation in my heart was drained completely. I stood rooted to the spot, my mind going utterly blank with disbelief. Dominating the center of the gate was a large, newly printed official notice poster. The paper was crisp white, the text bold black and strikingly eye-catching. Printed squarely in the middle of the poster was a clear frontal photograph of me, a casual snapshot Liana had taken casually during a city trip years ago, a simple, ordinary photo capturing my unpolished, working-class appearance. Beneath the photograph, thick bold letters blared the merciless verdict. This individual is strictly prohibited from entering the wedding venue. No entry permission granted. No loitering permitted on site. Black words on white paper, clear photograph, explicit order, unambiguous, unsparing, utterly shameless in its public rejection. I stared fixedly at the poster, repeatedly verifying the face, the features, the familiar lines etched by years of labor. It was undeniably me, without the slightest possibility of mistake. My throat tightened painfully, turning dry and sore. My voice trembled uncontrollably as I struggled to speak, clinging to a last thread of desperate hope. There must be a mistake. I'm the bride's biological father. How could I be banned from my own daughter's wedding? Is there some kind of misunderstanding? The guards wore obvious pity on their faces but strictly adhered to the orders they had been given. One lowered his voice and recited the exact words spoken personally by the bride and groom 3 days prior, every syllable cutting into my heart like a sharp blade, piercing through 30 years of paternal devotion and self-sacrifice. Sir, there's no misunderstanding at all. This notice was personally approved, posted, and arranged by bride Liana Carter and groom Brett Wilson 3 days in advance. The newlyweds explicitly stated that your ordinary working-class background, simple clothing, and humble demeanor are too plain and low-class for this high-end wedding. Your presence would lower the venue's grade, embarrass the bride in front of wealthy family and elite guests, and ruin the perfect wedding she has spent years preparing for. You are ordered to leave immediately and refrain from loitering to avoid disrupting the wedding ceremony. The moment those words landed in my ears, all the joyful music, guest chatter, and warm celebration surrounding me faded into distant, indistinct noise. The entire venue buzzed with joy and congratulations for the beautiful bride and groom. Everyone was celebrating completeness and happiness. I alone, the bride's closest blood relative, the man who had dedicated 30 years of his life to raising her, had become the only disgrace, the only outsider, the only forbidden presence at her perfect wedding. Passing guests paused to stare, their curious, sympathetic, and mocking gazes falling heavily on my hunched elderly frame. I had endured every kind of physical hardship and exhausting labor in my 63 years of life, yet I had never experienced such brutal, public, soul-crushing humiliation. My fingers tightened violently around the velvet jewelry box until my knuckles blanched white and my arms trembled uncontrollably. A suffocating pain exploded in my chest, so intense I could barely draw breath. I frantically replayed every choice I had made in my life, every sacrifice I had endured for my daughter. I had never once failed her, never once deprived her, never once hesitated to give her the best of everything I could possibly offer. Yet all my selfless devotion had only nurtured a vain, ungrateful daughter who would trample her own father's dignity for superficial social status, who would sever her blood ties to escape her humble origins. Drowning in shock and grief, I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking too violently to steady the screen. I dialed Liana's number repeatedly, desperate to hear her voice, desperate for an explanation, desperate to believe there was some hidden difficulty, some unspoken misunderstanding. But every call was rejected instantly, without a single ring. Refusing to give up, I dialed over a dozen times in succession, each attempt met with the same cold mechanical rejection tone. I opened our chat software and text messages, typing out earnest, trembling words, begging to know what had happened, telling her I was waiting at the gate, that I only wanted to see her one last time and send her off to marriage with my blessing. The moment I pressed send, a glaring red exclamation mark popped up on the screen. Message failed to send. I had been completely blocked. Phone calls blocked. Text messages blocked. Social media messages blocked. Every single channel of communication had been cut off completely, ruthlessly, without a single chance for reconciliation or explanation. In that devastating moment, I woke up completely. There was no misunderstanding, no coercion, no hidden hardship. This was not an impulsive mistake or temporary fit of anger. It was a carefully calculated, premeditated scheme planned 3 full days ahead of time. For the sake of a glamorous wedding, for the approval of a wealthy boyfriend, for acceptance into elite social circles, for a false, fragile sense of dignity, my own daughter had willingly, thoroughly abandoned the father who had given her life and everything she owned. Crushing sorrow, grievance, disappointment, and heartbreak crashed over me in overwhelming waves, threatening to break my composure entirely. Yet I clung stubbornly to my last shred of dignity. I did not argue, did not shout, did not beg, did not create a public scene. I had lived my entire life with integrity and self-respect, and I refused to lose my temper in public and completely destroy my daughter's reputation, even after she had destroyed mine first. I lifted my eyes one final time to gaze at the flower-filled, joyously bustling wedding manor, then glanced at the cold, humiliating notice that had shattered my entire world. I suppressed every turbulent emotion surging in my chest, turned slowly, and walked silently back toward my old pickup truck. My steps were heavy and unsteady, each stride feeling like treading on broken glass, my heart barren and desolate beyond description. The drive there had been 3 hours of pure joy, hopeful anticipation, and sincere love. The drive back was 3 hours of complete devastation, shattered dreams, and irreversible heartbreak. 30 years of fatherly love, 30 years of selfless sacrifice, 30 years of unwavering devotion, all reduced to worthless dust, completely erased in the face of my daughter's empty vanity. The drive back to town was endless and deathly silent. I sat motionless in the driver's seat for the entire 3-hour journey, allowing the cold wind to blow through the open window, stripping away the last traces of warmth from my body and freezing every lingering shred of my paternal obsession. The green trees, distant fields, roadside villages, and flowing traffic that normally made up the peaceful town scenery all appeared gray, blurry, and lifeless to my grief-stricken eyes. Countless fragmented memories flashed relentlessly through my mind during the lonely drive. I recalled Liana's soft, childish murmurs, her thoughtful companionship during my rare moments of rest in her youth, her sincere childhood promises to care for me in my old age. I replayed the countless freezing winter nights and scorching summer days I had spent laboring on construction sites, every penny I had scrimped and saved, every personal comfort I had sacrificed to ensure my daughter never suffered the hardships I had endured. I finally understood the bitter truth my coworkers had warned me about years ago. Overly soft-hearted, indulgent parents always raise ungrateful children. My lifelong unconditional giving, endless tolerance, and unreserved devotion had spoiled Liana completely. She had grown accustomed to my sacrifices, accustomed to my backing, accustomed to my humble accommodation. She had never learned to cherish, appreciate, or reciprocate my love. Instead, she had come to view my poverty, my ordinary status, and my selfless devotion as shameful stains on her perfect reputation. Dusk fell thick and heavy by the time I finally pulled into the familiar small town and parked outside my old courtyard house. This simple, rustic house, built brick by brick with my own hands, had sheltered Liana for 30 full years. It had been her safest harbor through every difficulty, her reliable home to return to no matter how tough life became. Yet the moment she achieved success, status, and glamour in the city, the first thing she did was abandon this home, disdain its simplicity, and reject the father who had built it all for her. The small courtyard was empty and deathly quiet, devoid of all warmth and laughter. I pushed open the wooden door and stepped into the silent, dim room. The faint echoes of past laughter and warmth had long since faded completely, leaving only endless loneliness and bone-deep desolation in their wake. I slowly removed the brand-new formal suit I had cherished so carefully, folding it neatly and placing it on the sofa. I knew with absolute certainty that I would never wear the suit again for the rest of my life. This wedding journey, once filled with pure hope and love, had become the most painful, humiliating memory of my life, a moment I would never wish to revisit or remember. I set the carefully restored pearl and silver jewelry dowry gently in the center of the tea table. The precious relics of my late wife, treasures I had guarded like my own life for 30 years, were undoubtedly cheap, tacky, and unworthy of her glamorous wedding in Liana's eyes. I did not turn on the lights, cook dinner, pour water, or wash up. I sat alone in the cold, dim living room from dusk until deep midnight, watching the sky darken completely outside the windows. Neighboring houses lit up one after another, filled with warm lamplight and family laughter, their lively, peaceful warmth starkly contrasting with the icy isolation of my empty home. I did not break down crying, did not roar in anger, did not complain about fate or misfortune. The deepest heartbreak never manifests in hysterical collapse. It settles a silent numbness and complete letting go. I saw the truth clearly at last. The sensible, warm, grateful little girl I had raised was gone forever. Vanity and greed had completely corrupted her conscience and gratitude, leaving only a cold, selfish stranger in her place. While I sat alone in crushing grief and silence, the extravagant wedding ceremony at the suburban luxury manor continued in full swing, untouched by my despair. Liana stood radiant at the center of the flower-decorated stage, her designer gown flawless, her makeup exquisite, her smile bright and triumphant. Brett stood beside her in his tailored luxury suit, gentle and elegant, the perfect image of a sophisticated, wealthy heir. The pair looked undeniably glamorous and well-matched, becoming the envy of every guest in attendance. Every detail of the wedding was meticulously expensive and luxurious. Imported floral arrangements, custom dessert tables, premium imported champagne, professional high-end hosting, top-tier wedding photography, and exclusive luxury wedding favors. The over-the-top grandeur fully satisfied Liana's years of suppressed vanity and allowed Brett to show off his family status in front of every elite guest, earning him immense social prestige. No one among the admiring guests knew that this picture-perfect, glamorous wedding was nothing but a gilded facade hiding utter emptiness and ruin. To maintain this extravagant high society appearance and satisfy their insatiable vanity, Liana and Brett had drained all their personal savings, maxed out every credit card, borrowed heavily from multiple high-interest online lending platforms, and even taken out massive private usury loans. Their accumulated wedding and personal debts exceeded 6 figures in total. From the very beginning of wedding planning, neither Liana nor Brett had ever intended to take responsibility for their own reckless spending or repay their own debts. They had only ever had one plan in mind: rely entirely on me. They knew clearly about my 6-figure trust fund and the substantial luxury mansion down payment I had saved for Liana's future. They were fully aware that every asset I owned was reserved exclusively for my daughter's security. They were utterly convinced that no matter how coldly they treated me, no matter how ruthlessly they humiliated and abandoned me, I would always soften, compromise, and sacrifice my life savings to bail them out. They believed my decades of paternal indulgence guaranteed I would always clean up their mess unconditionally. It was this unshakable sense of privilege and certainty that emboldened Brett to manipulate Liana into driving me away from the wedding. He had encouraged her to sever all contact with me publicly, simply to preserve his fake wealthy dignity and hide his connection to a working-class father-in-law from his elite social circle. Liana had acted with equal recklessness and arrogance, secure in the knowledge that my endless forgiveness would always await her no matter how cruel her actions. She had blocked me publicly, humiliated me openly, and abandoned her blood ties without hesitation, all for the sake of empty vanity and social praise. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the grand wedding ceremony and banquet finally concluded. All guests departed satisfied, and the bustling venue felt quiet and empty. The noisy celebration faded completely, leaving only silent luxury behind. Bathed in the afterglow of her perfect wedding victory, Liana's elation and pride lasted only a moment before sudden, overwhelming panic crashed over her. In the euphoria of her glamorous day, she had completely forgotten the most critical truth. Every asset transfer, fund withdrawal, and asset change required my personal legal signature. Without my approval, the 6-figure trust fund and luxury mansion down payment were permanently frozen, inaccessible dead assets. There was no way to use that money to fill their massive debt void. Worse still, in her reckless pursuit of momentary dignity, she had blocked every single method of contacting me, cutting off every possible channel for apology, negotiation, or reconciliation. She had burned every bridge with the only person capable of saving her from ruin. Terrifying dread washed over Liana instantly, draining all color from her face and leaving her hands ice cold and trembling. All her joy, pride, and glamorous confidence vanished without a trace, replaced by pure, blind terror. Brett noticed her sudden, desperate panic and pressed her urgently for an explanation. After learning the full truth, that all assets were frozen indefinitely, that they had completely alienated their only financial savior, and that their massive debts were completely unrepayable, his gentle, refined facade shattered instantly. All traces of warmth and politeness vanished from his expression, replaced by rage, panic, and vicious resentment. He erupted into a furious roar, no longer bothering to hide his true ugly nature. "Are you insane? Who told you to block him completely? Who let you push things to the absolute limit? All our debts depend on his signature to get paid off. We were relying on his money to fix everything. You've completely ruined us. Do you have any idea what you've done?" The newly married couple erupted into a vicious, desperate argument in the empty manor's back hall, blaming and resenting each other relentlessly. Liana cried and defended herself hysterically, insisting she had acted foolishly in the heat of the moment, blinded by the pressure of the high society wedding. Brett raged uncontrollably, condemning her foolish vanity, short-sightedness, and stupidity for destroying their perfect, wealthy future with her own hands. The fierce quarrel faded into suffocating, hopeless silence. The full weight of their desperate situation crashed down on both of them. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in high-interest loans, credit card debts, and wedding expenses were rapidly approaching their due dates. Overdue payments would trigger crushing compound interest, relentless debt collection harassment, legal lawsuits, and asset seizures, completely destroying their lives and reputations. Abandoning all pretense of newlywed romance and elite elegance, they hastily changed out of their expensive wedding attire, tossed their designer clothes carelessly into the trunk, and sped frantically toward my small-town residence as dusk fell. No longer chasing vanity or status, they were driven purely by raw desperation. Cornered and helpless, they had no choice but to swallow their pride, humble themselves completely, and come begging for forgiveness, hoping to use cheap apologies to coax me into sacrificing my life savings to save them from the ruin they had created. Shortly after 6 o'clock in the evening, twilight shrouded the quiet small town. The peaceful silence of my courtyard was abruptly shattered by the harsh, urgent braking sound of a luxury car speeding to a stop outside my gate. I sat quietly in the dim living room, my heart completely calm and undisturbed. I had anticipated their arrival long before they appeared. I knew their true nature too well. Selfish, snobbish, and opportunistic. They fawned eagerly when benefits were available and abandoned ruthlessly when there was nothing to gain. Now that they were cornered by crushing debt and impending ruin, they would naturally cast aside all arrogance and dignity to beg for mercy. Rapid, frantic knocks echoed continuously from the wooden gate, sharp and anxious, filled with undisguised fear and urgency. I stood slowly, my footsteps steady and unhurried, my expression impassive. I walked to the courtyard gate and pulled it open without hesitation. Standing outside were the newly married Liana and Brett. Their designer wedding outfits were still on their bodies, slightly disheveled from their frantic drive, their perfect makeup smudged and messy. Yet every trace of the day's glory, confidence, and elite poise had vanished entirely. Their faces were pale, their eyes filled with panic, anxiety, and desperate helplessness. The moment she saw me, Liana instantly switched to a vulnerable, tearful expression. Her eyes reddened instantly, and hot tears spilled down her cheeks without warning. She hurried forward, reaching out to grab my arm, her voice trembling and choked with manufactured guilt and remorse. "Dad, I'm sorry. I truly know I was wrong. Everything today was my fault. I wasn't intentionally humiliating you or abandoning you. There were so many upper-class guests and my husband's family elders at the wedding, and I was so nervous and scared of being judged. I lost my head and made the worst mistake of my life. I regret it more than anything. You're my dearest, most beloved Dad. I could never truly disown you or be ashamed of you. Please forgive me just this once. Please give me one more chance." She cried bitterly, pouring out endless fake apologies, her tearful performance flawless and convincing. 4 years, she had relied on this exact vulnerable, remorseful act to soften my heart and make me forgive every one of her selfish mistakes. She believed her tears would once again melt my resentment and win her unconditional forgiveness. Beside her, Brett quickly suppressed his earlier rage and ferocity, forcing a stiff, polite smile onto his face. He set aside all the arrogant superiority of a wealthy heir, lowering his posture completely to offer insincere apologies. Uncle, we're truly incredibly sorry. We were immature and thoughtless today, causing you immense grievance and embarrassment. It's all my fault. I didn't guide Liana well, and I cared too much about superficial status, putting unnecessary pressure on her. Please don't hold it against us, or take it to heart. The wedding is over now, and all misunderstandings are cleared up. We will definitely treat you well and make it up to you in the future. The pair cooperated perfectly, singing a harmonious duet of fake remorse. They painted their cruel, premeditated public humiliation as a youthful, impulsive mistake caused by wedding pressure and nervousness. They skillfully downplayed their ruthless betrayal and cold-blooded abandonment as a trivial, innocent error in judgment. Yet after 63 years of life and decades of observing human nature, I saw straight through their flawless performance to the greedy, anxious calculations hidden beneath their remorseful facades. They were not here to apologize, not here to repent, not here to mend our broken father-daughter bond or make up for the pain they had inflicted on me. They were here solely because six-figure debts had cornered them into absolute desperation. They knelt and begged humbly, acting pitiful and remorseful, only to coax me into softening my heart, signing off on my life savings, and bailing them out of the disaster their own vanity had created. In broad daylight, they had trampled my dignity and abandoned my love for empty social prestige. Under the cover of night, they groveled and apologized for the sake of cold hard cash. No greater display of selfish snobbery and hypocrisy could ever exist. I stared at them calmly, my tone flat and unemotional, devoid of anger, blame, or argument. You've said your piece. Come inside. I turned and walked back into the living room, and the two of them hurried to follow me closely. They stood stiffly in the center of the room, their bodies tense, their eyes wandering nervously, completely stripped of their usual arrogance and superiority. Every inch of their posture radiated anxious unease. I walked to the tea table, pulled open the wooden drawer, and took out a thick stack of paper receipts and records, spreading them neatly across the tabletop. This heavy pile of documents was the complete record of my 30 years of devotion and sacrifice, every entry authentic and irrefutable. The records included every semester's tuition and academic fees from Liana's kindergarten, elementary, middle, high school, and university years, every medical expense, physical examination fee, and vaccination costs throughout her childhood and adolescence, all her living expenses, pocket money, clothing, and daily consumption costs, every transfer and travel expense during her 2-year relationship with Brett, and even all the preparations and purchases I had made for her wedding. No single entry represented an enormous sum of money, yet every penny was earned through countless overnight shifts, tons of heavy bricks, and buckets of sweat under scorching suns and freezing winds. This thick stack of ordinary paper weighed heavily on the table, a tangible record of my entire life's unreserved dedication and self-sacrifice. I lifted my gaze to meet their increasingly panicked faces, my voice steady yet powerful, every word striking true and unyielding. Liana, look carefully at these records. See clearly every bit of blood, sweat, and effort I poured into raising you for 30 years. I have no education, no powerful background, no inherited wealth. Every dollar I own is earned through honest, backbreaking physical labor, earned through enduring every hardship and fatigue life could offer. Every cent is clean, worthy, and earned with complete integrity. You lost your mother at the age of 3. As a single father, I took on every role. I worked myself to exhaustion every day to support our family, then came home every night to cook, clean, wash your clothes, and care for your every need. I raised you single-handedly through every difficult year. I gave up every hobby, every pleasure, every personal comfort for 30 years. I never allowed myself a nice meal or new clothes, saving every resource to give you the best possible life. I never once asked you to repay me, never expected you to support me in my old age or give me a comfortable life. My only lifelong wish was for you to grow up honest, grateful, steady, and happy. Yet I never imagined that the daughter I sacrificed everything to raise would abandon and humiliate me for empty vanity and social status, would choose a stranger over the father who gave her everything. On your wedding morning, I put on the finest suit I have ever owned, carried your mother's most precious relics, and drove 3 hours with nothing but sincere blessing in my heart, simply to walk my daughter down the aisle. What did I receive in return? A humiliating exclusion notice posted publicly at your wedding gate, your deliberate dismissal of me as poor and disgraceful in front of your elite guests, and your complete severance of all contact with me. On your happiest, most glorious day, you thoroughly denied 30 years of my nurturing and devotion. From the moment you posted that notice and blocked me, our father-daughter bond was completely broken. You were the one who cut every thread of our relationship. No one else is to blame. Liana's face drained of all color, her body trembling violently as tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. She shook her head frantically, choking out desperate denials. Dad, I was wrong. It was just a momentary mistake. I was flustered by the grand occasion and lost my senses. I didn't mean it. Please give me another chance. I'll take good care of you from now on. I'll stay with you every day. I'll never make this mistake again. I raised my hand gently, cutting off her endless fake excuses and empty promises with unshakable firmness. Ordinary mistakes can be forgiven, but mistakes of conscience and loyalty can never be undone. You chose vanity over family, status over blood, and strangers over your own father. You must bear all the consequences of that choice. With her tearful pleading completely ineffective, Brett finally lost his last shred of patience. He discarded his polite fake smile entirely, revealing his true vicious, irritable nature. He stepped forward abruptly, raising his voice in a furious roar, his face twisted with anger and resentment, shamelessly shifting all blame onto me. You're just being stubborn and petty. It's just a tiny, trivial matter, yet you hold a grudge and refuse to let it go. She's your biological daughter. You spent 30 years raising her just to see her live a good life. Now you're deliberately freezing your assets and refusing to sign just to ruin her marriage and destroy her future. You're a selfish, twisted old man. His furious shouting echoed loudly through the quiet neighborhood, spreading instantly to every nearby residence. The harsh, quarrelsome noise drew all the neighboring townsfolk to my courtyard gate, where they gathered to watch the commotion, whispering and speculating about the fierce family conflict unfolding before them. Within minutes, my courtyard gate was surrounded by a crowd of curious neighbors, all watching the dramatic confrontation between father and daughter, between elder and son-in-law. Faced with Brett's shameless slander and twisted accusations, and the crowd of onlookers witnessing everything, I felt no fear, no embarrassment, no hesitation. I had lived with integrity my entire life. Every resident in this small town had witnessed my 30 years of hard work, my single-minded devotion to raising my daughter, and my gentle, honest character. I had absolutely nothing to hide or be ashamed of. Holding the complete stack of payment records and evidence in my hand, I calmly and clearly recounted the entire truth of the incident to every watching neighbor. I told them of my early widowhood, my 30 years of single-handedly raising Liana through endless hardship. I told them of my extreme frugality and relentless labor to support her education and privileged upbringing. I told them of my lifelong choice to remain single and sacrifice every personal joy for my daughter's future. I told them of my sincere 3-hour wedding journey that ended in public humiliation and complete estrangement. I finally exposed their true scheme of accumulating massive wedding debts and coming to fake repentance solely to swindle my life savings. I spoke without exaggeration, without bitterness, without deliberate smear, simply stating every factual detail plainly and honestly. I finished my account with a calm, firm summary for the gathered crowd. I have never owed my daughter a single thing in my life. I have given her every best thing I could possibly offer, sacrificed my entire youth and future to give her a stable, successful life. It was she who grew ashamed of her origins, ashamed of my working-class status, and ashamed of the hardships I endured for her. She abandoned her own father and trampled 30 years of nurturing grace for empty face and status. Since she refuses to recognize this family and disowns her own blood, I have no obligation to sacrifice my life savings to satisfy her vanity and pay for her foolish mistakes. Every neighbor present had watched me struggle alone for 30 years, had seen my extreme indulgence and selfless love for Liana, and had gradually witnessed her growing vanity, arrogance, and estrangement from her roots. The entire crowd erupted into unanimous outrage and heartfelt sympathy after hearing the complete truth. She's absolutely ungrateful. Harry has suffered more than anyone can imagine all these years, gave his daughter everything, and gets treated like this. It's unconscionable, humiliating her own father at her wedding just for status, then crawling back to beg for money when she's in trouble. How can someone be so shameless? This young man looks refined and educated, but his character is rotten. He only knows how to scheme against an old man's hard-earned money and shift all blame. Despicable. Truly raising a white-eyed wolf. All that devotion for 30 years wasted on an ungrateful child. Any reasonable person would never forgive this. Poor Harry, suffering so much for nothing. Wave after wave of righteous condemnation and regretful sighs crashed over Liana and Brett, completely stripping them of their last shred of dignity and pretense. Brett's arrogant rage vanished instantly. He stood frozen in place, his face burning bright red with shame, unable to utter a single word of rebuttal or excuse. His fists clenched tightly at his sides, his eyes filled with helpless, furious resentment, yet he dared not speak another word. Liana collapsed completely into tears and trembling despair. She stood in the center of the crowd's condemning gazes, utterly humiliated and devastated. The glamorous vanity and superior status she had spent years chasing crumbled completely in the face of public judgment. She finally understood the magnitude of her foolish, reckless mistake. Her momentary vanity and cowardice had severed her only family tie, broken her father's heart completely, and left her with an eternal reputation as an ungrateful, snobbish, immoral daughter in her hometown. The crowd of neighbors sighed and shook their heads repeatedly as they slowly dispersed, their lingering whispers still filled with disappointment and criticism toward the two young people. The courtyard gradually returned to silence, leaving only the three of us in a heavy, suffocating atmosphere. Even after being publicly shamed and universally condemned, Liana refused to give up her last, desperate hope. She abandoned all remaining dignity, pride, and pretense. She grabbed my wrist tightly with both hands, crying brokenly and kneeling lower and lower, begging repeatedly with extreme humility. "Dad, I truly, thoroughly know my mistake now. I'll break up with Brett immediately. I don't want the wealthy life or high society status anymore. I'll stay in this small town to accompany you, take care of you, cook for you, and spend your old age with you. I'll spend the rest of my life making up for my sins. Please soften your heart just once and sign to help us get through this crisis." Watching her desperate, hypocritical performance, her remorse only for her ruined future rather than her broken family, the last wisp of warmth and reluctance lingering in my heart dissipated completely. I pulled my wrist free gently but firmly, my tone calm yet unyielding, delivering my final, irreversible verdict. It's too late. The human heart is not stone. Every betrayal cools it a little. Every abandonment hardens it further. You severed our father-daughter bond with your own hands. There is no going back, no possibility of repair. I raised you for 30 years. I have done everything I should do, and I have no regrets, no debts to you. You were the first to abandon me, shame me, and disown me. I will completely respect your choice and no longer interfere in your life or sacrifice anything for you. Your mother's trust fund and my mansion down payment, all my life's assets, will be fully donated to the town's orphan charity institution. Every cent will go to Innocent Chapter 6, The Reckoning of Empty Vanity. Silence crashed over the courtyard like a heavy stone. The evening breeze rustled the old tree branches outside the gate, carrying away the last traces of day's warmth and leaving only piercing cold in its wake. Liana stumbled back a step, her knees scraping roughly against the concrete ground as she collapsed half kneeling, half standing. Her meticulously styled wedding hair was disheveled, her waterproof mascara streaked down her cheeks in black trails, turning her perfect bridal makeup into a messy, pitiful wreck. Gone was the confident, glamorous bride who had stood on the wedding stage that afternoon, basking in endless admiration and glory. All that remained was a desperate, terrified young woman facing the total collapse of her carefully constructed dream life. She stared at me blankly, her lips trembling repeatedly, unable to utter a single complete sentence. The final, unyielding verdict I had delivered had shattered every last illusion she had clung to for years. Brett stood frozen beside her, his face ashen and lifeless. The gentle, sophisticated, wealthy air facade he had worn for 2 years crumbled completely, revealing the petty, ruthless, and desperate man beneath. He had never once truly loved Liana, nor cared about her happiness. He had only ever seen her as a tool, a beautiful, obedient trophy who came with a hidden fortune waiting for him to claim. He had tolerated Liana's vanity, catered to her every whim, and played the role of the perfect fiancé purely because he coveted my life savings. He had calculated every step perfectly: marry the naive, grateful daughter, win over the soft-hearted father, and seize the six-figure assets to pay off his own family's hidden debts and sustain his extravagant high-society lifestyle. His entire scheme had relied on one single, unshakable assumption: that a father's love would always surrender, no matter how cruel the betrayal. But he had underestimated the weight of public humiliation, the exhaustion of 30 years of unrequited devotion, and the finality of a broken heart that had loved too deeply for too long. "You can't do this." Brett's voice was hoarse and shaky, stripped of all his earlier arrogance and rage, reduced to a desperate, disbelieving mutter. "That money is for Liana. It's supposed to secure her future. You have no right to donate at all. You're ruining her life out of spite." I lifted my gaze, my eyes cold and devoid of any sympathy or fluctuation. After a lifetime of gentleness and compromise, there was no longer a single trace of softness left in my heart. I earned every penny of that money with my own blood and sweat. I sacrificed my youth, my health, and every personal joy to save it. It was reserved for a grateful child who cherished my efforts, not for a pair of selfish people who trample on family bonds and feed on my kindness. She ruined her own future the moment she hung that exclusion notice at her wedding gate. You ruined your own future the moment you manipulated her into betraying her only family. Every consequence you face from today onward is self-inflicted. I bear no responsibility for your greed and vanity. My calm, unwavering tone crushed the last spark of hope in Brett's heart. He finally understood that my decision was irreversible. There would be no last-minute compromise, no tearful reconciliation, no paternal mercy. The free bailout he had spent years plotting was gone forever. Panic finally consumed Brett completely. He turned abruptly toward Liana, his previous tenderness replaced by blazing hatred and furious blame. He grabbed her shoulders violently, shaking her ruthlessly, his voice a vicious snarl echoing through the quiet courtyard. "This is all your fault. If you hadn't been so stupid, so vain, so obsessed with saving face in front of those shallow socialites, we wouldn't be in this mess. I told you to handle your father properly, to smooth things over quietly, but you had to humiliate him publicly, burn every bridge, and leave us with no way out. You've destroyed everything we had." Liana was jolted violently by his shaking, fresh tears pouring down her ruined cheeks. She had expected comfort, support, and shared desperation from her new husband. She had foolishly believed their wedding vows bound them to face hardships together. But in the face of real crisis, his true nature exploded without restraint. All the sweet promises, gentle whispers, and romantic gestures of the past 2 years vanished in an instant. Beneath the perfect lover facade was nothing but a cold, calculating opportunist who abandoned his partner the second she lost her financial value. "It's not my fault." Liana sobbed brokenly, struggling weakly against his grip. "You told me my father was a stain on our reputation. You said cutting him off would let us fit into high society. You encouraged me to post that notice. You can't blame everything on me now. Don't you dare shift the blame." Brett roared, shoving her hard. Liana stumbled backward, tripping over the stone steps of the courtyard and landing heavily on the hard ground. Her expensive wedding gown scraped against the rough stone, tearing at the hem and staining with dust, completely ruining the designer garment she had once been so proud of. The newly married couple erupted into a brutal, vicious fight right in my courtyard, screaming accusations and tearing down every fake layer of their perfect marriage. They exposed each other's schemes, each other's greed, each other's lies and hypocrisy without reservation, no longer bothering to maintain any pretense of love or harmony. I stood aside silently, watching their farce with icy calm. This was the true face of the glamorous marriage everyone had envied that afternoon. No sincere love, no loyal companionship, no blessed union, only mutual calculation, selfish exploitation, and fragile vanity propping up a hollow relationship. After screaming themselves hoarse and exhausting every ounce of rage, they collapsed into breathless, defeated silence. The reality of their desperate situation crashed over them with crushing weight, sharp and unescapable. Their six-figure debts were rapidly accruing compound interest every single day. Credit card companies and lending platforms would soon launch formal collection procedures. Legal lawsuits would follow, bringing public records of their debts, asset seizures, and irreversible damage to their personal credit. The elite social circles Liana had spent years squeezing into would never accept a couple drowning in debt and public disgrace. The glamorous, wealthy wife life she had craved for so long was already slipping through her fingers, vanishing completely. Brett stared at Liana with unmasked disgust and resentment, no longer willing to waste a single second on the woman who had ruined his carefully laid plans. Without a single word of comfort or apology, he turned on his heel, stormed toward his luxury car, and slammed the door violently. The engine roared to life, and the vehicle sped away into the dark night, leaving Liana alone and abandoned in my cold courtyard. He had abandoned her without hesitation the moment she lost her value as a financial pawn. The perfect wedding, the sincere vows, the endless pampering, all of it had vanished the second my asset freeze shattered his greedy dreams. Night had fully fallen by now. The moonlight spilled thinly over the courtyard, casting cold, pale shadows on Liana's trembling, lonely figure. She sat motionless on the cold stone ground, her tears finally drying up, replaced by numb, hollow despair. She had lost everything in a single day. She had publicly humiliated her only family, severed her father's unconditional love, burned all her lifelong safety nets, and ruined her financial future, all for a fake marriage that collapsed at the first sign of trouble. She had traded 30 years of selfless paternal devotion for a fleeting day of empty vanity and a lifetime of endless ruin. Slowly, shakily, she pushed herself up from the ground. Her pride was completely shattered, her arrogance worn thin, her glamorous aura vanished without a trace. She turned toward me, her eyes red and swollen, her voice hoarse and fragile, stripped of all pretense and performance. "Dad, I have nowhere to go." Her voice trembled with genuine terror, no longer the fake remorse of before. "The debt collectors will come for me soon. Brett left me. I have no money, no home, no one to turn to. Please, please give me a way out. I'll do anything. I'll change completely. I'll be the good daughter you want. Just don't let me fall apart." Her words were hollow and late. She was not begging for forgiveness for hurting me. She was begging for salvation for her own desperate plight. Even at this moment, trapped in total ruin, her remorse was still rooted in selfishness, not conscience. I looked at her quietly, my heart no longer stirring with any sorrow, anger, or pity. 30 years of love had been erased completely by a single day of ruthless betrayal. I spoke slowly, my tone steady, final, and unyielding. "You chose your path on your wedding morning. You chose vanity over family, status over sincerity, and strangers over the one who loved you most. Every path you walk from here is your own choice, and every consequence is yours alone to bear. I have sheltered you, fed you, and sacrificed everything for you for 30 years. My duty as a father is done. From this night forward, we are no longer family. I will not help you repay your debts. I will not shelter you from your mistakes, and I will not save you from the ruin you created." Liana's body convulsed with desperate sobs. She reached out her hands toward me, trying to grab my sleeves, trying to hold on to her last sliver of hope, but I stepped back gently, avoiding her touch completely. "Remember this night well." My voice was calm, yet carried the weight of 30 years of ended devotion. "The dignity you craved so badly, the high society status you sacrificed everything for, the perfect life you dreamed of, all of it was built on my blood and sweat. When you abandoned me, you abandoned every bit of your own good fortune. No one can reap the benefits of sincerity while choosing greed. No one can trample on their own family and live a smooth, prosperous life. This is not punishment. This is just the most ordinary, fair reckoning of life." I turned away from her trembling figure, walked back into the house, and gently closed the wooden courtyard door, separating her desperate despair from my peaceful, newly freed life. The heavy wooden click echoed clearly in the quiet night, marking the complete end of 30 years of father-daughter ties. Outside the door was her chaotic, ruined future, filled with endless debt, public disgrace, and lonely struggle. Inside the door was my quiet, peaceful new life, finally free from endless sacrifice and unrequited love. The night wind blew steadily, sweeping away the last trace of turmoil from my heart. For the first time in 30 years, I felt no burden, no worry, no reluctant compromise. I had loved fiercely, sacrificed fully, and finally let go completely. From this day on, I live only for myself.